Hello, everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review.
Operation Guardian of the Walls has entered its 11th day today, with heavy rocket attacks resuming Thursday morning after a relatively quiet night on Wednesday. A house in Ashkelon suffered a direct hit, with one person moderately injured. Now, despite the rocket fire, both sides are preparing for a ceasefire, which, according to multiple reports, could take effect as early as Friday. ILTV's Hannah Rifkin with the report.
Israelis had a relatively quiet night on Wednesday, a short respite from rocket attacks from around 1 a.m. until Thursday morning around 9:30 a.m., when Hamas began firing rockets at Israel's southern border towns again. Additionally, a soldier was lightly injured by shrapnel Thursday as an anti-tank missile was fired at an empty bus along the Gaza border. No additional injuries have been reported so far. According to the IDF, some 70 rockets were fired by Hamas between 7 p.m. Wednesday and 7 a.m. Thursday, with 10 of those falling back into Gaza. Israeli air defenses were able to intercept 90% of the rockets. The IDF also minimizing the intensity of its attacks Wednesday night, though announcing it continued to attack Hamas's underground tunnel system, dubbed the Metro. Hamas invests millions and millions of dollars digging their terror tunnels, with the IDF estimating that one tunnel costs an estimated $800,000, with 2 miles of a terror tunnel, the equivalent of supplying the entire Gaza Strip limitless electricity for 1 week. The IDF also said it struck additional terrorist infrastructure, including 2 weapons depots located in the homes of Hamas operatives, as well as 2 underground rocket launching stations in Jabalia that were used, among other things, to fire rockets at Tel Aviv in recent days. Additionally, the IDF targeted a Hamas multi-barrel rocket launcher, which was armed with 5 rockets ready to target Israeli civilians. Meanwhile, as the IDF continued to protect its southern border, on Wednesday 4 rockets were launched from southern Lebanon towards Israel's northern cities. Israel's missile defense system intercepted 1 rocket, while another landed in an open area, and 2 fell in the Mediterranean Sea. This marks the 3rd time that rockets were launched from Israel's northern border since the beginning of the conflict. According to reports, the Iranian-backed Hezbollah terror group was not involved in the incident, with the rockets most likely being fired by Palestinian factions in solidarity with Gaza. Despite the ongoing conflict, there is a sense of de-escalation, with both the IDF and Hamas minimizing the intensity of their attacks. Senior Hamas officials told CNN that a ceasefire could happen very soon, possibly within 24 hours. This follows a statement Wednesday by Deputy Head of Hamas's political bureau, Musa Abu Marzouk, who said he expected a ceasefire within a day or 2. And the New York Times, citing Israeli officials familiar with negotiations, that a ceasefire agreement could take place within the next 2 days. However, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, on his part, has remained adamant that despite international pressures, Israel seeks to see the military operation through to the end before negotiating a ceasefire.
כל יום שעובר, אנחנו פוגעים בעוד יכולות של ארגוני הטרור. מסכלים עוד מפקדים בכירים, מפילים עוד מגדלי טרור, פוגעים בעוד מצבורי נשק. כפי שאמרתי היום לשגרירים שנאספו כאן, זו הזכות הטבעית של ישראל.
The IDF has said that one of its main objectives in this current operation is to take out senior Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad figures in Gaza, with Mohammed Deif, a name you may have heard before, at the top of the list. But who is Mohammed Deif, and why is Israel targeting him? Hannah Rifkin with the report.
The IDF has tried and failed to kill Mohammed Deif, the commander of Hamas's military wing, the Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam brigades, not once, but twice since the beginning of Operation Guardian of the Walls, the IDF confirmed this week. While it did not release the details of the operations, the military said Deif was able to get away at the last minute both times. Considered by the Israeli military to be a skilled commander, Deif is the mastermind behind numerous terrorist attacks which have killed Israeli citizens. He has been on Israel's most wanted list for the past 25 years. Israeli security services have tried to kill Deif multiple times over the years. The first attempt took place in 2001 and another in 2002, which left him partially blind. A third attempt was made in 2003, and an attempt in 2006 left him seriously injured, losing both of his legs and an arm. In the 2014 Gaza war, Israel made another attempt, initially believing Deif had been killed. He managed to survive that attack as well, however, though his wife and children did not. Earlier this week, the head of the IDF Southern Command, Eliezer Toledano, told Israel's Channel 12 News that Mohammed Deif, along with Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's Gaza leader, remained in Israel's sights. Whether or not Israel is able to finally and successfully target Mohammed Deif until the ceasefire is reached remains to be seen, though no doubt he will continue to be on Israel's radar.
Moving on, in the collective effort to help and protect Israeli civilians living in communities most affected by Hamas's rocket fire, Yad Ezra Shulamit is sending aid to the front lines by the truckload. And here to tell us more about it, Danny Gervitz, resource developer for Yad Ezra Shulamit. Danny, thanks so much for being with us now. Yad Ezra Shulamit has been doing its part to help in the midst of this rocket fire. Tell us a little bit about what that mission is.
First of all, thanks for having me on, Aaron. Yad Ezra Shulamit in peaceful times delivers 10,000 food baskets a week to Israel's poor and needy. But very often, as we all know, living in this neighborhood of the world, there are other emergencies that Yad Ezra Shulamit has to contend with, and one of them are military operations that seem to find themselves in the south. So what Yad Ezra Shulamit does very often, and is doing as we speak, is sending truckloads of food baskets to the poor and needy who just cannot get out of their bomb shelters. There's been a continuous rain of rockets down south, and these people just can't get out to get basic foodstuffs for their families. So Yad Ezra Shulamit sees where they go down and they get the food back to the people.
So again, if you could speak to why this assistance is so critical, because, I mean, you make it sound like food is not getting to the south. Is that the case?
Well, I would say that food is getting to the south. I don't think that any of the major food suppliers in Israel have stopped shipping down south. You would hear about that probably before even of the rocket fire. But what the problem is that people can't leave their bomb shelters because of the continuous rain of rockets that are going on down south. You just can't leave. I mean, that's very, very hard to us to understand, me in Maladamim, you in Tel Aviv, but it's just constant. So people don't want to or are afraid of leaving their bomb shelters. So we can go down and bring a lot of the food to the poor and the needy who just can't get out of the bomb shelters.
And endangering yourselves in the process, it sounds like. How many people is Yad Ezra Shulamit able to reach for distribution purposes?
Well, as soon as we find drivers, we're able to send down truckloads. Each truckload can feed about 500 families. They have food baskets enough for that amount. And we just keep sending it as fast as we can find drivers. It's just, it's tough to find people who want to drive down south, but we have the trucks ready, and hopefully we can send more and more as we get the drivers that are needed. I think what's interesting here is that, when people want to help, they think of, wow, Magen David Adom, emergency services, Hatzalah, Army, soldiers. These are all very, very worthy, noble, and very needed organizations that get assistance. But I don't think that people realize that people also need food.
Yeah.
And not that food is scarce down south, but that people cannot leave the bomb shelters to go to the grocery or the supers to get the food. So that's where we hopefully will fill in some of the gaps.
So final, comment, if you can tell us how ILTV viewers can help.
Well, I think there's a link down there, and everyone who's concerned about Israel, who wants to help, we would love for them to sponsor a food basket per family. I mean, there's no end to the amount of people that needs this. We're serving Netivot, Sderot, and Ashkelon, but there are many other cities that are in need of these emergency food baskets. So however many drivers we can find and however many food baskets are sponsored, we can get it down there. So we have the infrastructure.
Sure.
Yad Ezra Shulamit is very well versed in getting food out to poor and the needy. And all we have to do is just get a little bit of assistance from our viewers out there. That would be wonderful. And drivers that can help us go down south and distribute the badly needed food.
All right, so you heard it here. Danny Gervitz from Yad Ezra Shulamit, feeding the needy, the most needy in Israel right now. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on, Aaron.
Now, meantime, as the world looks on from abroad, many are still levying primary criticisms on Israel's doorstep, all while ignoring the fact that Hamas is a terrorist organization bent on the destruction of Israel, America, and the eventual deaths of both Jews and Christians worldwide, among other things. At least one man pointing out the seemingly obvious, though, in a recent piece titled "The Truth About the Hamas Terrorist Organization." With me in studio is author of the book Industry of Lies, journalist at Ynet, and attorney Ben-Dor Yamini. Ben-Dor, it's a pleasure to have you back with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, what was your honest, what was the driving force behind writing this piece specifically?
Because I do read and I do hear many people. I do hear from my friends in Paris and New York telling me about, telling me about Jews who participate in demonstrations in favor of the Hamas and against Israel. And I'm asking myself, okay, it's fair enough to be humanist, to be liberal, to be progressive, fair enough. I mean, partly I'm too. The point is that they have no idea what is a Hamas, what they're looking for, what is their aim. And their aim is not Israel. People should know it. The leaders of the Hamas, just listen to them. They are saying we want to conquer Rome. We want to conquer, I'm quoting, the two Americas. I mean, they are part of the global jihad. Just like the Islamic State, what they want is actually a total destruction with a kind of caliphate that will control the world. Don't they understand it? No, they do not. Don't they know it? No, they do not. And many times, well, it's a failure. Let's admit, it's a failure of Israel. If people who demonstrate against Israel, if those anchors that are so humanist, they do care about the people in Gaza, where have you been when the United States and the coalition bombarded in Baghdad, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and so many civilians, innocent civilians were killed? How comes that all what you have in mind is to criticize Israel? The only one state.
Well, so I read in your piece that you chalk it up, at least in part, to a great ignorance on the part of third-party observers and people who are protesting from abroad and really don't know necessarily the ins and outs of this. But we're hearing similar things from the AP, from Al Jazeera, who have Hamas firing from right underneath their feet.
Yeah.
Do they not know? Are they ignorant?
Sometimes, you know, it's not that they don't know. Some people do not know. But those people that you're talking about, intellectual journalists, they should know. They are supposed to know.
So why do they ignore that fact?
Hatred. I mean, they went out of their mind. Hatred. I don't know if to say anti-Semitism. Not everyone out there, and we cannot always say anti-Semitism and so on. But when we are speaking about intellectuals, we had enough. I don't want to explain them. You're asking me to explain what? I don't want to explain them. I want to put the facts on the ground and to tell them you are hypocrites. You are inciting against one state that is fighting terror. They are looking for killing all of us. And you are blaming us for defending ourselves? I mean, what a chutzpah.
So that actually brings me to another piece, because we've got tons of international condemnations, especially coming from the UN, the EU, etc. And it seems that even when they call for calm on all sides, which I think we can all agree that that is a goal that we can support, somehow Israel is still singled out. For example, I have EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell maintaining Israel's right to self-defense, but only in a proportionate manner. What does that mean?
Let's do something, I mean, that they will never accept. Let's compare. How many you killed in, for example, Kosovo in 1999? Innocent civilian comparing to soldiers, combatants against non-combatants. Let's compare. And I'll tell you something. I mean, if you are an expert about the military battlefields, it's time to know that Israel killed much less proportionally comparing to any other battle of that kind. I mentioned Afghanistan and Iraq. Not only. Even in Libya when they bombarded. How many civilians were killed? I mean, how comes that you complain about one state when you killed much more, absolutely and proportionally? So, and then they criticize Israel, hypocrites.
Well, even take it, I mean, let's play devil's advocate and take the argument seriously that there is a line at which point the response is disproportionate. What is that line?
They crossed the line. Israel never did. Great question. They crossed the line because I can show you the numbers, which, of course, I compiled and researched in my book. And if you can contradict my data, do it. You cannot. You cannot because you know that I'm telling the truth and you are lying again and again. It's not criticism anymore. It's not criticism anymore. I mean, because to criticize, I mean, we do it ourselves. In Israel, it's a free country. 80% of the journalists are criticizing the government. We don't need your interference, which is helping the Hamas. That's what you're doing.
All right. So, author of Industry of Lies, journalist Ben-Dor Yamini, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, while international pressure amps up on Israel to reach a ceasefire agreement with Hamas, several countries have continued to express their solidarity with the Jewish state. The foreign minister of Germany, Heiko Maas, arrived in Israel on Thursday in a show of support. He was invited by Israeli Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi.
Wir haben immer betont, dass Israel das Recht hat auf Selbstverteidigung. Davon macht Israel jetzt Gebrauch. Und zu diesem Recht gehört, dass man die Einrichtungen, von denen Angriffe auf israelische Ziele ausgehen, nicht weiter operieren lässt. Und dazu gehört auch, dass man durch die Selbstverteidigungsmaßnahmen, die man angeordnet hat, natürlich auch versucht, zukünftige Angriffe zu verhindern und damit auch die Infrastruktur, die es gibt für zukünftige Angriffe, so in das, was an militärischen Aktionen und Reaktionen hier geplant ist, einbindet, damit auch in Zukunft davon keine Gefahr mehr ausgehen kann. Und insofern sehen wir das, was Israel tut, als gedeckt vom Recht auf Selbstverteidigung.
The foreign ministers of the Czech Republic and Slovakia also arriving in Israel Thursday. The show of solidarity comes on the heels of mounting international pressure on Israel, most notably by U.S. President Joe Biden, to reach a ceasefire agreement in the coming days. Biden, who has also expressed his support of Israel's right for self-defense throughout the operation, held a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday, saying he expects a significant de-escalation today on the path to a ceasefire. And while Israel has remained adamant that it will complete the operation, all roads seem to be leading towards a ceasefire.
In other news, while riots continue across Israel, large sections of the Arab Israeli public are organizing peaceful protests and strikes as well. And whether you agree with their positions or not, I for one agree with their method of protest as opposed to the lynchings and indiscriminate attacks perpetrated by other mobs. Chana Rifkin with the story.
Arab workers across the state of Israel organizing a strike on Tuesday in protest against Israel's military campaign in Gaza, as well as against recent disputes in Jerusalem. And the strike, initiated by the Arab High Follow-Up Committee, urging all Arab activists to stand at the entrance to Arab communities and try to convince locals not to go to work. Likewise, activists also blocking certain roads and organizing at popular venues near government buildings, public squares, and more. The strikes hitting all business industries except for private education. Finally, while some protests did turn violent with pipe bombs and tire fires reported, most scenes were perfectly peaceful.
يجب زي ما قلت علينا كلنا كشباب إن نضرب ونتوقف عن العمل لمدة يوم واحد على كل شيء عشان نصنع بعض من التأثير في القدس وفي البلد ومش راح يضر حدا يوم واحد من الإضراب ولا أسبوع من الإضراب وما حدا راح يموت جوع بلا مؤاخذة. شباب القدس كلها بتآزر بعضها. كل شيء بيرخص فدا شباب. وكل شيء بيرخص فدا القدس والأقصى وفلسطين.
Meanwhile, of course, there are those who disagree with the protests, pointing to Israel's open society and support for individual civil rights. Israeli Arabs enjoy full citizenship rights in Israel and occupy space in virtually every sphere from medicine and police to parliament.
השביתה הזו מיותרת כי לא חסר להם שום דבר והם כביכול מזדהים עם עזה, אתה יודע, ועזה לא יכולה לעזור להם בכלום.
In any case, blowback already reported too, albeit to a very limited degree. Several businesses, industry leaders, and ministers looking to thwart the strike. The Education Ministry, for example, criticized for requesting a list of teachers who participated in the protests, while management at Rambam Hospital argue that the strike brings politics into healthcare unnecessarily. Rambam adding that the strike doesn't even comply with labor law, as strikes can only be called by workers' organizations and must be submitted as part of a labor dispute 2 weeks in advance. Finally, elsewhere, several strikers being fired illegally, participants being let go without receiving a hearing to outline reasons for dismissal and provide opportunity for appeal, as required by Israeli labor law. Still, again, most companies choosing to ignore the one-off absences, saying a strike of this magnitude doesn't warrant cutting off a person's source of income as a first step.
Changing tune now, yet another altogether avoidable disaster befalling the Jews of Israel during what was supposed to be a celebration. 2 Israelis killed and dozens more injured over the Shavuot holiday as rows of makeshift bleachers collapsed under worshippers in a Givat Zev synagogue. Hannah Rifkin reporting.
Hundreds gathering in the town of Givat Zev on Sunday, just outside Jerusalem. The crowds gathering in a small makeshift synagogue to celebrate the Shavuot holiday. But the evening ending in disaster as a 12-year-old boy and a 40-year-old man were killed, and dozens more were injured in a terrible structural collapse. To make matters worse, the incident just a few weeks after the tragedy at Mount Meron was similarly avoidable. Organizers at the event likewise allegedly warned in advance that the building as a whole was unfinished and unfit to hold crowds. And in fact, more to the point, the collapse occurring as hundreds of parishioners danced atop wooden makeshift bleachers, negligently attached with iron wire and zip ties to the existing stairs in the hall. Witnesses saying even children were involved with the bleachers' hasty construction.
הכל עם תפסנות, עם חוטי ברזל. אתה מבין ששום דבר לא מחובר? אין, שום דבר לא מחובר או קשור אחד לשני, אין ברגים, הכל עם תפסנות, עם חוטים של בניין. זה כל התוספת בנייה שנפלה.
We wish all the victims of this incident a speedy recovery.
And that's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.